"Take the pretty one," my father told the Duke. He didn't. He looked past the candlelight, past the emerald silk, past the practiced smile, and found me where I'd been taught to stand, near the wall, half behind a curtain, useful only as background. If you want more dark, sweeping historical romance where power chooses the wrong girl on purpose, tap subscribe now, because this is the night the spare daughter gets noticed, and nothing stays polite after that. My name is Mara Ravenscroft, and for 22 years, Blackmere Hall had trained itself to forget I existed. I was in the library when Celia returned from London. That was where I always was when the house decided to celebrate, in the one room that tolerated quiet. Late afternoon spilled through the tall windows in pale, buttery stripes, dust drifting in it like slow snow. I had Locke open across my knees, my finger resting on a line about the mind being written on by the world. Then the gravel drive sang with wheels. A maid's voice rang down the corridor like a bell. "Lady Celia's home." Everything moved at once. Doors, footsteps. The sudden bright clatter of a household remembering it had a purpose. I kept my eyes on the page, because I'd learned that turning toward noise only made you feel it more when it wasn't meant for you. Through the half-open door I heard Celia laughing, that easy silver laugh that made people soften around her without realizing they were doing it. "I swear the modiste nearly fainted," she told Mrs. Dalloway, our housekeeper. "The green silk was brought out like a crown jewel. Father will adore it." "Of course he will," Mrs. Dalloway said with a warmth she never tried to hide. "You'll dazzle them all." No one asked if I wanted anything. No one ever did. Fabric was for girls who were going to be looked at. I was the girl who held the pincushion. A shadow crossed the doorway. Celia appeared in a traveling cloak, cheeks pink from the cold, hair loosened from its careful pins. She had the kind of face painters chased, the kind men remembered after one glance and spent an entire season trying to see again. "Mara," she said, breathless with happiness. "I should have known you'd be here." She crossed the room and took my hands, squeezing as if she could pour her warmth into my skin. "Welcome home," I said. The words were true. Whatever the world did with Celia's beauty, it was never her fault she was born with it. She had never been cruel. She only lived in a world that bowed to her without being asked. "You must come see the gowns," she insisted. "There's a blue one I thought might suit you. I had her cut it to your measurements." The gesture was real. So was the way it landed. Blue, for a sister who stayed quiet, chosen like one sets out a vase in a room already decorated. "That was thoughtful," I said, softening it so she wouldn't hear the bruise beneath. "Thank you." For a breath her expression wavered, something like regret flickering behind her eyes. Then her smile returned, bright as if she could outshine anything she didn't want to examine. "Come, I need you to tell me how to wear my hair for the first ball." I followed her into the corridor. 2 maids passed carrying hat boxes. They curtsied to Celia. Their eyes slid over me as if I were a sconce. I did not blame them. I had trained the household too. You cannot ignore someone for years without eventually believing you're correct to do so. Later, I sat by the small parlor fire with a book open that I wasn't reading. The study door was shut, but sound travels in old houses the way water does. It finds cracks, it seeps, it makes its own path. 6 months, Mr. Harrowby said, our solicitor. His voice was always careful, as if he feared truth might shatter something. "Perhaps less if your creditors decide to press." My father's voice tightened. "There must be an answer. The land is already pledged, my lord. Every acre, every carriage, even the silver. The title will survive, but the house, the rents, the income, you will lose them." Silence followed, heavy enough that my hands curled hard around the book's spine. Then my father spoke again, slower now, like a decision hardening. "Then Celia must marry well, and quickly." I swallowed once, my throat suddenly too small. "Duke Adrian Vale is seeking a wife," my father continued. "Thornwick, 8 years a widower. He's hosting again. He's finally stepping back into society. Celia will solve this. His grace is particular," Mr. Harrowby warned. "Then she will be what he wants," my father said, and I heard the sound of a man choosing a route through a burning house. She must be. I sat very still, not because the news shocked me, but because it didn't. The plan had always existed without being spoken aloud. Celia's face was the family's last currency. The study door opened abruptly. I looked down at my book fast enough to pretend it mattered. My father strode past the parlor without glancing in. He passed 3 feet from my chair, and the air he carried smelled faintly of ink and panic. He did not see me. At dinner, He watched Celia like a man measuring a jewel under lamplight. She spoke of London, of fabrics and colors, her voice brightening on command. I ate quietly. I excused myself before dessert. No one noticed until the chair cooled. I returned to the library. Mrs. Dalloway had lit a single candle beside my chair, the closest thing to tenderness the house ever offered. I reopened Locke. I stared at the words until they blurred. The conversation from the study kept repeating itself in my mind as if it belonged to someone else's life. Celia must marry well. Not me. Never me. It wasn't even that I wanted a husband. It was the plain, sharp fact of being excluded from usefulness, as if my existence could not even qualify as a tool. Hooves struck gravel outside, quick and urgent. I went to the window. A messenger dismounted in the courtyard and thrust an envelope into a footman's hand. The house swallowed it and carried it inside. Moments later, Celia's delighted cry carried through the corridor. "Father! An invitation!" I didn't move from the library window. I didn't need to. A ball at Thornwick. The Duke's seal. The trap set in wax and cream paper. 2 days later, seamstresses arrived. The morning room became a battlefield of pins, thread, and hurried hands. Celia stood on a platform while Madame Lenoir muttered about necklines and sleeves, her mouth full of pins like a threat. I hovered near the doorway, unnoticed as usual. Then a young assistant approached me with a gown over her arm. Pale stone-gray muslin. Plain. Severe. "For you, my lady." It was the kind of dress a person wears when the family wants her to disappear in crowded rooms. My fitting lasted 10 minutes. A few chalk marks, a tight tug at the waist. No one stepped back to admire. No one said beautiful. I caught my reflection and understood the intention instantly. In this dress I would be easy to overlook. My father called it appropriate. The day of the ball arrived. Celia glowed in green silk like a promise. My father repeated instructions the entire carriage ride, as if he could talk her into a duchess. Smile, but not too broadly. Ask questions. Be agreeable. Don't challenge him. His gaze flicked toward me as one remembers a piece of luggage. "And you, Mara. Stay out of the way." "I know," I said. Thornwick Manor rose out of dusk in torchlight and music. When we entered the ballroom, the light almost hurt. Crystal chandeliers multiplied in gilded mirrors until the room seemed endless. The air smelled of wax, flowers forced to bloom out of season, an expensive perfume meant to make a woman unforgettable. I stayed near the edge, as instructed. Then I saw the Duke. Adrian Vale was not the smooth sort of handsome the young lords tried to practice. He was tall and solid in a way that made the room arrange itself around him, dark hair that refused to stay perfectly tamed. A face cut with restraint and something older, something that had learned to keep its grief quiet. His mouth looked like it had forgotten how to laugh easily, and that made the rare curve of it matter. He greeted guests with calm precision, courteous without charm. His eyes moved like he was always assessing distance, exits, threats that no one else could see. My father stepped forward like a salesman on his last commission. "Your Grace." He bowed low. "May I present my daughter, Lady Celia Ravenscroft, the finest jewel in England." Celia curtsied, perfect as a porcelain figure. The Duke bowed, said something suitable, offered his arm. Society exhaled in approval as he led Celia to the dance floor. My father's face loosened into triumph. I slipped away. Along the far wall stood an unexpected luxury. Towering bookcases filled with real volumes, not hollow props. I drifted toward them as if drawn by thirst. My fingertips moved along spines. Philosophy, poetry, political essays. Then I saw it, a slim blue leather volume, Wollstonecraft. My pulse flicked up. I pulled it free and opened to the first page, the words as familiar to me as my own breath. A voice spoke beside my shoulder, low and amused. Bold choice for a ballroom. I turned. The Duke stood 3 feet away, watching me like I wasn't furniture. Heat climbed my neck. "Your Grace, I didn't mean to." "Why not?" he asked, gentle as if the question mattered. "Books aren't here to be worshipped. They're here to be used." My mouth opened, closed. I had no rehearsed lines for this. He nodded toward the page. "Have you read it?" "Yes." "What did you think?" The question wasn't polite conversation. His eyes stayed on my face as if my answer would change something. I took a breath and let the safest part of me speak, my mind. "I think she's right," I said. "Ignorance doesn't preserve virtue. It just preserves dependence. A society that refuses women education isn't protecting anyone. It's making sure half its people stay easy to manage." A flicker shifted in his expression, like a lamp being turned up. "You disagree with the ones who call her improper. They confuse obedience with morality," I said, and the words came quicker once they started. "If virtue can't survive knowledge, then it isn't virtue. It's fear in a dress." For the first time that night, his mouth moved into something real, not a host's smile, a private one. "She would have liked you," he said quietly. I knew who she was. Everyone did. Lady Elowen Hart, dead 8 years. The loss that built a wall around Thornwick. "I'm sorry," I said, softer. "Don't be." His gaze dropped to the book in my hands. It's been years since anyone spoke to me like I'm a person instead of a tragedy. My heart gave a strange, tight beat. I recognized that hunger. Not for romance, for being met. Then my father's voice cut through the moment like a snapped thread. "Your Grace!" He appeared at the edge of our small circle, confusion sharpening into alarm when he saw who the Duke was facing. Celia stood behind him, her smile still in place, but her eyes no longer certain. "My younger daughter wanders," my father said too brightly. "I do hope she hasn't bothered you." The Duke's warmth shuddered, the host returning like armor. "Not at all." Lady Mara and I were discussing literature. He looked back at me, just once, direct, unapologetic. "I hope we might continue another time," he said, low enough that only I heard. Then he bowed, turned away, and rejoined the crowd. My father's hand closed on my elbow the moment he was out of earshot. His fingers were tight. "What did you say to him?" "He spoke to me," I said, still holding Wollstonecraft like proof that I hadn't imagined it. "You were told to stay out of the way." "I was out of the way," I replied, and my voice surprised me by staying steady. He walked over. My father's jaw worked. "See that it doesn't happen again." He took Celia's arm and steered her back toward the center, already planning his next move. I returned the blue book to the shelf with careful hands, but my fingers shook. Across the ballroom, the Duke's gaze swept the room, and found me, just for a heartbeat. Then he looked away like a man forcing himself to do what's expected. But I'd felt it, the sharp, impossible sensation of being seen. The next morning, the house erupted before breakfast. "The Duke is calling today," my father announced to the corridor like he was addressing an army. The drawing room, fresh flowers. Celia, the cream muslin. No, the rose. The rose will soften you. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to flatten what I'd felt the night before into something safe and small. A mistake, a curiosity, a momentary distraction. That's what men like him did, didn't they? Glance at an oddity, then return to the obvious choice. I dressed in pale blue and went down. Celia sat over her plate, not eating. Her hair was pinned perfectly. Her hands were still, but her thumb worried the edge of her napkin until the linen frayed. "Congratulations," I said quietly as I took my seat. She looked up. "Does father think congratulations are appropriate?" Before I could answer, my father swept in. He paused when he saw me, as if surprised I'd assembled myself without instruction. Yes, you'll sit in the drawing room as well, Mara," he said. "It would be strange if you weren't present." It would be strange, he meant, if the spare chair were empty when the Duke looked around. He arrived at 3 precisely, as the rules demanded. A footman announced him with reverence. Duke Adrian Vale, Duke of Thornwick. He entered carrying late roses, their petals dark at the edges like bruises. He offered them to Celia with correct courtesy and spoke about the weather like it was a safe bridge across a deep river. Then his eyes cut to the corner where I sat with a book open that I wasn't reading. "Lady Mara," he said, and the sound of my name in his mouth did something unsettling to my ribs. "What are you reading?" I held up Voltaire, because it was the nearest weapon I had. "Ambitious," he observed, and there was faint humor in it, like he wasn't sure anyone else in the room would understand why it mattered. "Do you agree with him?" And just like that, the room tilted. We spoke of tolerance, of reason, of what people call truth when they mean comfort. He asked questions the way a man asks when he intends to listen. I answered like a person who had been starved and suddenly offered bread. Celia sat with roses in her lap, still as a portrait. My father's smile twitched at the corners, uncertain how to redirect without appearing rude. The visit ended at the proper time. The Duke rose, bowed to Celia, thanked my father, and looked at me again as if the conversation had been a door left half open. "I look forward to continuing," he said. The moment his carriage disappeared down the drive, my father turned toward Celia with contained panic. "You must engage him more," he demanded. "Ask him questions. Laugh. Be lively." Celia's voice stayed soft. He was speaking to Mara. Then speak louder, my father snapped. You cannot let your sister steal the air from the room. I left before the argument could pull my name into it like a hook. It didn't stop. Every third day the Duke came, always at proper hours, always with an appropriate gift, flowers, a slim book of poetry. Botanical prints Celia praised dutifully. Always he spoke to me, not flirtation, not improper compliments, just focus, attention. The dangerous sort of interest that can't be brushed off as kindness. Celia grew quieter. I noticed the places her composure cracked, the brief tightening around her mouth when the Duke's chair angled toward mine, the way her gaze dropped to her hands when my laughter slipped out without permission. My father stayed in denial, insisting it was politeness, insisting Celia simply needed to perform harder. Then, on a crisp afternoon when the garden leaves burned gold and red, the Duke did something that rearranged everything. The day is remarkably fine, he said to my father. Might I walk your gardens? I've heard they are lovely this season. My father nearly fell over himself agreeing. Celia, he ordered, you will accompany his grace. I was hoping, the Duke said mildly, that both Lady Celia and Lady Mara might join us. I find conversation moves better in a small group. It wasn't improper, not quite, but it was unusual enough that even my father blinked. We walked out, Celia on his right, me on his left, though I kept a careful distance, hands clasped in front of me, as if posture could protect me from rumor. We reached the rose arbor when a maid appeared breathless. Lady Celia, forgive me. Your mother asks for you. She needs your opinion on tomorrow's dinner. A lie delivered with a straight face. Celia read it instantly. She looked from the maid to the Duke to me, and something passed behind her eyes that was sharper than jealousy. Of course, she said. Then, before she left, she leaned toward me and whispered, so only I heard it. Don't you dare disappear on me now. She swept away, leaving me alone with the Duke among fading roses. My chest tightened. This was not proper. This was not safe. He did not move to return to the house. Instead, he walked deeper into the arbor like a man stepping into a decision. Your Grace, I managed, because silence felt like standing on a cliff. You were expected to court my sister. Expected, he repeated, as if tasting the word. By your father, by London, by anyone who thinks a wife is chosen the way one chooses wallpaper. She is beautiful, I said, defensive on her behalf and mine. She is, he agreed. And when I speak with her, I feel admiration, like one feels before a painting. It is pleasant. It does not reach me. I stopped walking. The leaves underfoot were loud in the quiet. Then why do you keep coming? The question left me before I could soften it. He faced me, close enough that I could see a faint scar cutting his left brow, like an old reminder. I lost the only woman who ever argued with me in public, he said carefully. Elowyn would have adored your stubbornness. My fingers curled. I'm not trying to resemble her. I know. His voice grew lower. I spent 8 years speaking only when required, managing estates, attending funerals, saying the correct words to the correct people. I thought that was all life would be. He held my gaze. There was nothing theatrical in him, nothing performed. Then I watched you at my ball, he continued, not watching the room, not hunting attention, holding Wollstonecraft like it mattered. And when you spoke, you didn't decorate your thoughts to please me. You said what you meant. My breath caught. When you speak, he said, I feel awake. That's simple. That impossible. I heard myself answer with the only honest thing I had. I am not prepared for this. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Neither am I. I swallowed. I am not my sister. People will say you are misguided. They will say grief has made you reckless. Let them, he said. The sound of footsteps on gravel drew us apart. He stepped back, restoring distance as if he'd never crossed it. My father appeared at the edge of the arbor, eyes bright with suspicion. Your Grace, he said too quickly. Celia will return shortly. The Duke's face became his host's mask again. We should return to the house, he said to me, and his tone held the faintest thread of private promise beneath the polite surface. It grows cold. That night, I stood at my window and watched his carriage lanterns fade into darkness. My heartbeat did not settle for hours. On the third day after that, I heard whispers in the servant corridor. Imagine, a maid said, breathy with delight. The Duke preferring the plain one. Perhaps he's not right in the head, another replied. 8 years is a long mourning. The words slid under my skin like cold rain. I went upstairs without being seen and shut my door. By afternoon, the whispers reached my father. He found me with a book in hand and fury in his eyes. "My study," he said, and there was no room for refusing. He shut the door hard enough that the glass in the window rattled. "What have you done?" His face was flushed, his hands tight. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of him calling, and only now do I understand you've been inserting yourself. "I didn't invite him," I said. "You distracted him," my father snarled. "You paraded your learning. You made yourself interesting. You were meant to be quiet." Something in my chest made a sound like a thread snapping. "Quiet," I repeated, "so Celia can be louder. Our family is facing ruin," he said, voice cracking on the word. "Celia must save us." I stared at him, and the years of being overlooked rose to the surface like a tide. "I have a right to exist," I said, and my own voice surprised me with its steadiness. Not as her shadow, not as a piece of furniture, as myself. My father's eyes widened as if I'd spoken in another language. "You will stop," he said. "When the Duke calls, you will remain silent. You will remember your place." "My place," I echoed. "You mean the corner." He didn't deny it. I left before my face betrayed me. Before tears could become a weapon he'd call hysteria. The library took me in like it always had. I sat in my chair by the window and let my hands shake without apology. I didn't hear the door open. A handkerchief appeared near my knee. I looked up. Celia sat beside me, her eyes red-rimmed, her hair unpinned as if she'd torn it loose with her own hands. "I heard him," she said. "Half the house heard him." "I'm sorry," I started. "Don't." Her voice cut through it, firm. "Not for this." We sat in silence long enough that the candle flame steadied. Then Celia spoke again, quieter. "I have been jealous of you." I blinked. "Of me?" "Yes," she said, and there was a bitter laugh at the edge of it. "Because you were allowed to be dull in public, allowed to read, allowed to exist without being inspected like merchandise. You were ignored, and it hurt, but you weren't handled." She rubbed her thumb over her own knuckles as if remembering pressure. "I fell in love 3 years ago," she admitted, "with Captain James Loring. Father found out. He sent him away, India. He made sure the letters stopped." My throat tightened. "Celia, I've been smiling ever since," she said. The words were plain. The cost of them was not. "And now Father wants me to do it again, but with a duke, as if that makes it noble." I reached for her hand. She gripped mine like a lifeline. "The Duke looks at you," Celia said, and she didn't sound jealous now. She sounded sure. "Not your face. You. It's different." "I don't know what to do with it," I whispered. "Do something brave," she said, and her eyes shone with a fierce kind of hope. "Tell him the truth. Tell him about the debts, about Father's desperation. If he chooses you, let it be with open eyes." My pulse hammered. "If Father tries to stop me, then I will stop obeying," Celia said, and it sounded like a vow. For once, we sat there, 2 sisters who had finally spoken without performance between us. Outside the library, the house continued its frantic preparations for a future it couldn't afford. Inside, Celia squeezed my hand once and said, "No more corners for either of us." 2 days later, an invitation arrived on thick cream paper sealed with burgundy wax. Tea at Thornwick Manor. My father read it 3 times, his lips parting like a man staring at salvation. "This is it," he breathed. "He means to offer." I stared at the seal and felt my stomach tighten, not with excitement, but with the weight of what I had to do. Tell him the truth, not the softened version, not the polite version, the ugly arithmetic that had been muttered behind closed doors. At Thornwick, sunlight made the estate even more imposing, wealth without effort, order without strain. Gardens cut into perfect geometry. We were received in a drawing room that smelled faintly of leather and tea leaves. The Duke greeted my father with calm courtesy, my sister with proper attention, and then his gaze found me and held for half a breath longer than etiquette allowed. Tea was poured, weather discussed, a mention of an exhibition, normal words placed over abnormal tension. Then the Duke set down his cup and turned to my father. "Lord Ravenscroft," he said, "I would request a private word with Lady Mara." My father's cup rattled against its saucer. "That would be irregular," my father managed. "I am aware," the Duke replied, steady. "I still ask your permission." It was not truly a request. My father swallowed and nodded, because dukes do not need consent the way lesser men do. The Duke offered his hand. I took it, the warmth of his palm seeping through glove and pride alike. He led me to his study. It was a cathedral of books, walls lined floor to ceiling, leather spines catching sunlight, the scent of paper and old wood rich enough to make my throat loosen with relief. "My library," I breathed. "One of the few rooms that belongs to me," he said, and when he shut the door, he left it slightly ajar, a nod to propriety that somehow made the moment more intimate, not less. I turned to face him and forced the words out before courage could flee. "Your Grace, there is something you must know." He waited. My heart slammed against my ribs. "My father is ruined. We have months, perhaps 4. The estate is mortgaged beyond rescue. We will lose everything but the title." I swallowed hard. "If you are considering any association with our family, you deserve the truth. I will not be part of deception." He didn't look surprised. "I know," he said quietly. My breath left me. "I learned the circumstances before I attended my own ball," he added. "It would be irresponsible not to." "Then why?" I demanded, the question rawer than I intended. "Why come at all?" He stepped closer, not crowding, just closing the space like a decision. "Because money has nothing to do with worth," he said, voice low and certain. "And because I did not come looking for a transaction. I came because I was tired of living like I had already died." His eyes held mine with a steadiness that made lying impossible. "I found you," he said, my fingers clasped together hard enough to ache. "Do not offer to save us," I whispered. "It would turn everything into obligation." "Then don't let it," he replied, gentle but unmovable. "Let me settle your father's debts because it is within my power, and because innocent people will suffer if he fails. What exists between you and me will not be a purchase." My pulse pounded in my ears. "I am not proposing," he said, and I heard something like nerves beneath the steel. "Not yet. I am asking if you would allow me to court you honestly. No leverage, no debts between us. Only choice. Choice." The word sat in the air like something sacred. No one had ever offered it to me without expecting payment. I stared at him, and my throat tried to close around the fear that had lived there for years. He didn't move to touch me. He simply waited, as if my answer mattered more than his wants. "Yes," I said, voice shaking. "I will allow it." Relief crossed his face so quickly it was almost boyish. "Then I will speak to your father," he said, "and on Thursday I will call, if that remains acceptable." "Yes," I managed again. When we returned to the drawing room, my father looked pale, as if a ghost had spoken to him. We left Thornwick in near silence. Celia's hand found mine in the carriage and squeezed once. At home, the house breathed like a creature awaiting weather. In the days that followed, the whispers sharpened. The Duke courting the wrong sister, the plain one. I heard it first in the modistes' rooms, assistants thinking their voices too low. Then I heard it in a lady's laugh at a luncheon. By the time Lady Weatherby's garden party arrived, society had decided there must be something broken in the Duke to explain his attention. I nearly feigned illness, nearly retreated to the library and let the world keep its convenient story. Celia took my hand that morning and said simply, "We go together." So I dressed not in gray, but in a soft blue that didn't apologize for existing. We arrived to manicured hedges and silk canopies, and eyes that hunted scandal like sport. The whispering began immediately, not even hidden. She must have trapped him somehow. Grief turns men strange. She'll embarrass him. I kept my chin up because it was easier than collapsing. Then Lady Harrowgate appeared, a matriarch in steel gray satin with a smile sharpened to a point. "Lady Mara," she said, sweet as poison. A word. She drew me aside with the gentle authority of someone used to taking what she wanted. "My dear," she began, "this attachment is unfortunate." "Unfortunate," I repeated, carefully neutral. "The Duke requires a wife suited to his station," she continued. "Someone who can shine where it matters. You are out of your depth." The old shame surged up like a reflex, practiced and quick. I opened my mouth, but Celia stepped into the space beside me like a blade sliding from a sheath. "My sister has more grace in her smallest gesture than most women manage in their entire lives," Celia said, and her voice carried across the lawn. Conversation stuttered. Heads turned. Lady Harrowgate's smile froze. Celia's eyes didn't waver. "If the Duke chooses her, perhaps we should question our own judgment before we question his." For a breath, the garden held its breath too. Celia took my arm. "Come," she said softly to me. "The air here is stale." We walked away under a swell of murmurs, and I kept moving until we reached a path lined with late roses My composure finally gave out in my hands, in my breath, in the shake I couldn't hide. "I can't," I whispered. "They're right. I will ruin him. I will be a spectacle." A voice answered from the path ahead, calm and unmistakable. "Mara." I looked up. The Duke stood a few steps away, expression tight with concern, his coat dark against the sunlight. Even here, even outside ballrooms and rules, he looked like the sort of man portraits were painted for, not because of wealth, but because he seemed carved from certainty. Celia melted away without a word, leaving us the shelter of the roses. "What happened?" he asked, closing the distance enough that I could hear the quiet force in his breathing. "They say you're mad," I said, and the words came out rough. "That grief has damaged you, that I'm not fit to stand beside you." His gaze locked on mine. "Look at me." I did. "I spent 8 years surrounded by women society calls perfect," he said, voice low and fierce, "and I felt nothing. You made me feel alive again. Do you think I will surrender that because a room of idle people needs an explanation?" "I care," I admitted, hating the honesty of it. "I can't bear being mocked. I can't bear being the reason they laugh at you." His hands came to my arms, gentle but steady, anchoring me. "Then answer me," he said. "Are you rejecting me because you believe you don't deserve this? Or because they've trained you to hear their voices as your own?" The question cut clean. My breath caught. I couldn't hide behind philosophy now. "I'm afraid," I whispered, "that one day you'll look at me and see what they see, and regret." His expression softened. "You have never been invisible to me," he said, and his voice held no performance at all. Not once. His thumb brushed the edge of my sleeve like a vow kept small for privacy. "Stand with me," he said. "Let them whisper. Let them revise their stories. I need only one thing from you." "What?" "Choose this because you want it." I stared at him, the man who did not ask me to be prettier, quieter, easier. "I do," I said, and the words steadied as I spoke them. "I want it." His mouth curved in that rare, genuine way. "Then we return," he said, offering his arm. Together, we walked back into the garden's judgment, and I did not let go. The apology came that night. I was brushing out my hair, hands still unsteady from the day, when a soft knock sounded at my chamber door. "Come in," I called, expecting Celia. My father entered instead. He looked older than I remembered, not just tired, smaller, as if arrogance had been keeping him upright and something had finally cracked it. He stood near the doorway, as if stepping further into my room required permission he'd never learned to ask for. "Mara," he said, and the sound of my name in his voice was unfamiliar. I didn't stand. I didn't curtsy. I simply watched him. His throat worked once. "I failed you." The words fell heavy in the candlelight. "I saw only what society rewarded," he continued, rough-voiced, "and I convinced myself that was wisdom. I looked past you for years. I treated you like an inconvenience." He flinched at his own honesty. "I cannot undo it," he said, "but I see you now, and I am sorry. It wasn't poetry. It wasn't enough to erase a lifetime, but it was the first time he'd stepped toward truth instead of away from it." I felt my throat tighten, and I hated the softness that rose up with it. "Thank you," I said quietly, because it was all I could manage without breaking the fragile thing he'd finally brought me. He nodded once, almost like a bow, then left as awkwardly as he'd entered. I sat back down and stared at my reflection in the mirror. Same face, same mouth, same eyes that had watched everyone else be chosen. The difference was not in my features. It was in my posture. Weeks passed. The Duke courted me with steady, deliberate patience, as if he understood that being watched can make a person want to shrink. There were walks with Celia as chaperone, conversations that slipped from politics to poetry, to the quiet places grief hides. There were dinners where he asked my opinion, and then listened, not as a novelty, but as a partner in thought. He did what he promised. Quietly, my father's creditors stopped appearing. The house stopped holding its breath. Celia, in the midst of all this, began to change too, not into someone else, into herself. One morning, she pressed a sealed letter into my palm. "It came through a friend," she said, "Captain James Loring. He was returning to England." Celia's hand trembled as she admitted it. "He never married," she said. "He says he never stopped." I didn't tell her then that the Duke had already guessed, that his eyes had sharpened every time my sister's name met India in conversation, that he'd asked gentle questions and stored the answers like he was building something. The next invitation arrived from Thornwick, heavier than the others. A gala, the event of the season. Every person of consequence would attend. Every judgment that had whispered in gardens would show up with diamonds and smiles. Celia helped fasten the last button of my gown. Deep sapphire silk, elegant without pleading for approval. The color made my skin look warmer, my eyes clearer. It didn't transform me into a different woman. It simply stopped trying to erase me. "You look like you," Celia said, stepping back. My breath came shallow. "That's what frightens me." "Good," she said, and her smile held steel. "Now they can't pretend they don't see you." Thornwick Manor blazed with light. Inside, the ballroom glittered with chandeliers and ambition. Conversations paused as we entered, eyes snapping toward us like birds turning in a field. I felt the weight of it all immediately, the expectation, the hunger for spectacle. Then the room shifted. The Duke crossed the floor with purpose, as if the crowd were merely weather, and he had already decided to walk through it. He bowed formally to my father, to Celia, then turned to me. "Lady Mara," he said, and his gaze held mine in a way that made the rest of the room blur. "You came." It was such a simple line. It landed like an oath. The evening became a series of tests. A cold greeting from women who had built their worth on being admired. A curious question from men who wanted to understand why a duke had chosen the wrong sister. A few warm smiles, offered cautiously, as if approval could be contagious. Then the Duchess of Renford approached. Ancient, formidable, respected. A woman who had watched generations of society's games and learned which ones were worth playing. "My dear," she said to me, voice calm and clipped. I knew Elowen. I held my breath. "I watched the Duke vanish after she died," she continued. "I watched the season after season of beautiful girls fail to reach him." Her gaze sharpened. "He looks awake when he looks at you. That is not a small thing." She patted my arm once, like a seal placed on wax. "Call on me next week. We have much to discuss." It was endorsement, public, unmistakable. I felt my spine straighten without effort. The moment came at 10. The orchestra paused between sets, a hush sliding over the room like silk. The Duke crossed the floor, stopped before me, and offered his hand. "Would you do me the honor of this dance?" Everyone listened. Everyone watched, even the ones pretending not to. I placed my hand in his. "Yes," I said, loud enough that there was no room for rumor. "I would." He led me onto the floor. His hand settled at my waist, firm and steady. I placed my other hand on his shoulder and felt the quiet strength beneath the fabric of his coat. We moved. The room faded until it was only the measured sweep of a waltz and the man who had refused to let me stay background. "I see you," he said quietly, meant only for me. Not as a comparison, not as a consolation, as you. My throat tightened. I spent years thinking the problem was me. I admitted that I wasn't made for any of this. His mouth curved, the rare smile that changed his entire face. "You were made to be real." We turned once, twice. The chandeliers blurred overhead like stars. He drew a breath that sounded almost unsteady. "Mara," he said. The intimacy of my name in his voice made my heart stutter. "Will you marry me?" A ripple moved through the room, a shock that rose like a wave. He continued, voice still low but carrying in the hush. "Not as decoration, not as obedience, as my partner, the person who challenges me and makes me want to be better." My lungs forgot how to work. I looked at him, the man who'd offered me choice and then proved it was not a performance. "Yes," I said, and the word felt like stepping onto solid ground. "I choose this. I choose you." His expression broke open with relief so sharp it was almost painful to witness. He produced a ring, simple and deliberate, a sapphire set in delicate gold, the same deep blue as my gown. He slid it onto my finger as we continued to move, and when the light caught the stone, the room erupted. Applause thundered. Even the disapproving joined in, because the Duke's happiness was undeniable, and society loves certainty once it has been decided for them. We finished the dance engaged. When we stepped apart, commotion rippled near the entrance. A man stood there in traveling clothes, sun-browned, shoulders squared like he'd marched across continents with anger in his pockets and hope in his hands. His eyes found Celia, Captain James Loring. Celia's face changed in a way I'd never seen. The polished mask shattered. Something raw and joyous took its place. She moved toward him like she couldn't stop her own body. He met her halfway and took her hands, speaking words I couldn't hear, but I read them in the way he held her, careful and urgent, as if afraid she might disappear. The Duke leaned toward me, voice barely a breath. "I wrote to him," he admitted. 3 weeks ago. I explained enough that he understood what had been done to her. I stared at him, stunned. "Every love story deserves a chance," he said simply. Across the room, my father watched both his daughters, one engaged to a duke, the other reunited with the man she'd loved before anyone told her love was impractical. For the first time, I saw the full cost of his blindness land in his face. He met my gaze across the ballroom and nodded, not asking forgiveness, not earning it, but acknowledging the damage. A beginning, not a conclusion. Later, the Duke guided me to the terrace. The night air was crisp, stars scattered across the sky. The noise of the gala drifted through the doors behind us, distant and harmless. I looked down at the ring on my finger, the sapphire catching starlight. "I thought being overlooked was safer," I said quietly. He took my hand, thumb brushing the stone once. "Safe is not the same as alive," he replied. I turned toward him. In the shadowed quiet, without eyes on us, he looked younger, less armored, still devastatingly handsome, but more importantly, real. "I spent years waiting for someone to see me," I said, "and now that you do, it feels unreal." His forehead touched mine gently, a gesture so careful it was almost reverent. "Then let it be real," he murmured. "Day by day, conversation by conversation, choice by choice." Behind us, Celia laughed, bright and unguarded, the sound carrying out through the open doors like a promise. I squeezed the Duke's hand and let my shoulders loosen. I didn't become a different woman. I didn't suddenly become the one society had trained itself to adore. I simply stopped shrinking. And for the first time, the space I occupied felt like mine.